Hello and welcome to the Rogers Brief. I'm Adam Rogers. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. Today was day 46 of the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings, and today was a day where we got to hear the voice of Lisa Banfield for the first time. Ms. Banfield being, of course, the common law spouse of the killer Gabriel Wortman. They were common law spouses for 19 years, but this is the first time now we're over 2 years past the events where we've heard from Miss Banfield, though not directly. These were audio clips and video clips of a sort of a reenactment of her version of events that she performed with the RCMP in the fall of 2000. So that was significant in itself, just because it's been a long time. People have been waiting to hear from Miss Banfield. Now, she is going to give evidence on Friday, and this whole week has been sort of building to that day of Friday where she's to go on the witness table and give a version of testimony. Now, she's not going to be cross-examined, and we'll get into some of this, but it is her time to give evidence and speak publicly for the first time. She hasn't given interviews with the media. She hasn't spoken to anybody else publicly until now. And so this was the first time that we heard anything from Ms. Banfield. So that in itself was significant. Now, for those of you that are new to this, and the audience for the Rogers Brief seems to be growing a little bit, which is great. Hearing from people as I'm out and about that they're watching and paying attention to things. What I do is I tell people, well, if you want to hear what happened in the day's proceedings, there's lots of good media coverage to follow. If you want to know why things happened or what's important or get the legal analysis, that's what I'm here providing and trying to go a little deeper and explain why certain things are happening as things unfold in the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings. So today there were two things that took place. There was Miss Banfield's, the presentation of Miss Banfield's statements and reenactments. That was the second thing. The first thing was a presentation from two Australian experts on gender-based violence. This has really been a week where we've heard from several experts on gender-based violence, masculinity and mass shootings, and this sorts of thing. Today they were two professors, Jude McCullough and Jane Marie Mahar, both, like I said, from Australia, testifying over Zoom. Now, Jude McCullough is female, and I point that out because the name Jude here we would typically think of as a male name, but it was a female professor. And there seems to be a lot of female experts in this field, which more of a comment and observation, not so much a criticism, although it is interesting, and I think the field would probably benefit from more of a balanced gender view of things. So, in any event, the topic they were discussing was the connection between private and public violence. So if somebody is violent at home, well, certainly they're more likely to be violent in public as well. Now, how this relates to mass casualties is a little more difficult because the connection is visible in reverse. In other words, you see people that commit mass casualties, well, it is often the case that they are also violent in their private lives. But it's much more difficult to take it in the other direction in a predictive sense, in other words, to say, well, this person is violent at home and has been abusive for many years to expose children, whatever, and therefore are likely to commit mass atrocities. It's not predictive for the very simple reason that domestic violence is unfortunately quite common, but mass shootings are fortunately quite rare. Now, a couple of other points that the experts made. Mass shootings often involve family members, familicide. We learned this in the Desmond Inquiry as well. And half the deaths they identified in these shootings usually involve family members. Now, interesting, I suppose, although also fairly intuitive, I think, if anybody considered the issue, but the experts were not asked about times that they've studied or analyzed other situations where the spouse was spared in the sense, life was spared in the sense, in the way that Miss Banfield's was in this case. They weren't asked about the specific scenarios. Like every other expert that's testified in the Mass Casualty Commission, which is a real shortcoming of the commission proceedings, is that they weren't asked about the specific incident that we're examining. They also said, okay, so 30% of mass shootings targeted women. Do you think this one did? You may say, well, that's obvious because Miss Banfield's circumstances and involvement as the first victim, as the Mass Casualty Commission puts it. But if you look beyond that to the rest of the killing spree, it seems in a way that a lot of it involved property issues. Where the killer had an issue with a certain property and then attacked the people in that property. Maybe we'll learn more about other issues, but the Zal Thomas home, for example, seemed to be targeting the Forbes' house. Miss McCauley, of course, had a relationship, brief with the killer, but that home was owned by a family member, and there was a dispute over that. So there's some issues there with property matters as well. So it's not quite so clear in this situation that it was a mass killing that targeted women. Okay. Last thing that I'll mention about those experts, they do mention a good point, I think, is that it's not helpful and it's harmful to think about a specific woman as being a trigger for a mass killing. It can suggest, first of all, that the woman was the cause, which is not the case. The person who perpetrates it is the cause. And it also makes it harder to see the woman as a victim. Well, that's certainly true. And that brings us to Lisa Banfield and the presentation of her statements. Now, first thing that the commission lawyer tells us is that Ms. Banfield will not be retelling her experience of violence on Friday when she is called to give evidence. Instead, what we get today were little snippets of her interview with the Mass Casualty Commission lawyers, and some portions of the video of her reenactment or walkthrough of Portapic. Now, their videos are posted now on the Mass Casualty Commission website. There's one's over an hour long. There's some that are 20 minutes plus. So there's some length to them, and you get a real sense of her, just her way of speaking and presenting her facts, which, it's hard to tell, right? She comes across as credible and when she tells this story, but this is at least the fourth or fifth time that she's told the story. So, once you tell something a certain number of times, in a way it can become indistinguishable from what really happened. You develop memories of rehearsing a story in replacement of, or in lieu of, or in addition to the memory of the events. So people can watch for themselves and make judgments. Certainly the story was consistent with her earlier accounts of it. So that's certainly to her credit. But problem is she's not going to be telling any of that, and she's not going to be cross-examined on that. So it makes it much more difficult to accept her version of events. And so I think, today I think was really designed to take the drama out of Friday's appearance. She's going to be talking about who knows what else, but not the events themselves. So, which is a curious use of her time. And I think it's a mistake on her part. And whoever's giving her advice, I think should rethink that, or whoever's giving the commission advice. Now, because the commission presents this as their decision to treat Miss Banfield in this manner, not as a request from her for accommodations, as it was with the staff sergeants who had requested accommodations not to be cross-examined. So maybe we'll find out whether that was indeed a request or if it was just a preemptive decision on the part of the Mass Casualty Commission commissioners. In any event, I don't think it helps Miss Banfield's public reputation. She was able to go through these lengthy interviews, the reenactments, so it seems to me likely, at least, that she'd be able to stand up to questioning and gentle, respectful cross-examination on the stand. I look at this as the same as the early RCMP officers like Stuart Baselt and some of those others that I think really should have been testifying before or instead of these foundational document presentations. You can have the witness testify, use these audiovisual aids to bolster, to help explain the testimony and give it a larger dimension, but not as a substitute for that testimony. So I was thinking about this, and I did an interview this morning with Brian Hill from Global News, and he was telling me that they had asked the commission about why they haven't called any of the Wortman family members as witnesses. Because, Glenn Wortman, who would be a key witness perhaps, is in advanced stages of dementia, so I could see why that wouldn't be the case. But Paul Wortman, Gabriel Wortman's father, whose name we heard a few times this week as a horrible influence on his life and everybody else around him, could have been called as a witness. Well, the answer was this. They can subpoena people to appear as witnesses, but they cannot force anybody to show up to do a pre-interview. All right, so what does that tell you? So they're not going to call them as a witness. Well, that's easy. If you're a witness and you don't want to show up, just don't agree to an interview. But what it tells me is the Mass Casualty Commission is so committed to controlling the narrative that they wouldn't want to risk, you get somebody in and you don't know what they're going to say. You can ask them questions. You don't know what the answers are going to be. So it's unpredictable. It's a little risky if what you're trying to do is control the narrative and just have things flow in a certain way. And clearly the way they set up this week, for example, with all of these experts leading into Ms. Banfield's presentation or her appearance or evidence on Friday, everything was really set up to establish her as a victim. Okay, well, and that may be a fair conclusion, but just the way they go about it breeds suspicion. If you think about it from a PR perspective, well, this issue of not calling any of the Wortman family is the same way. It shows that they, being the Mass Casualty Commission, want total control of the narrative. Testimony and cross-examination are unpredictable, and so they're risky in that sense. But I think good for the public, for the public to see. And I think it's probably fair that the commission should, cede some control of these things and just be more comfortable with uncertainty. That's what live testimony is all about. Live testimony in other cases in other judicial proceedings is given a central role. Here it's seen as secondary or optional and to be avoided, really, if possible. So that's been their approach. It's the wrong approach. We've talked about this before. So what's happening Friday? What the Mass Casualty Commission has said to the other parties, the family participants, is you can submit questions, and then there'll be opportunities throughout the day to confer and suggest other questions. Well, the lawyers seem to be boycotting, and rightly so, boycotting this process on instructions from the family. Certainly Patterson Law and Tara Miller from MDW Law are doing so. Boycotting the process. They're not going to legitimize this illegitimate process by acquiescing and participating in it. So I think that's the right approach from the families. It keeps the focus back on the Mass Casualty Commission and the witness themselves to, all right, well, we're not going to do the work for you. You do it if you think this is the right approach and show us how you think it's going to work out. So people will have a chance to judge that when we see her on Friday. By the way, Friday, of course, the sort of laziest, most common PR exercise is to put things you don't want people to see on a Friday. So here we are with the most important witness of the Mass Casualty Commission testifying on a warm summer day in July on a Friday. So what does that tell you about what the Commission wants you to see and hear? Okay, but let's talk about a little bit of what we heard of her testimony and the evidence that came out today. So some of the evidence confirmed what Ms. Banfield has been saying throughout, that when she was dragged out of the house, she had sneakers on, tried to run away. The perpetrator, Wortman, threw a sneaker one way, threw the other sneaker the other way. Well, they were found. The sneakers were found. in places where you might expect them to be found given that account. The tree, she said she hid overnight in this tree. Well, I was in Portapic and walked through the woods for a while, and it's like, well, there's no trees, there's no big trees here. Every tree is small, nothing capable of hiding behind, under, or whatever. But the video today showed this large tree, a fallen tree, where Miss Banfield claims to have hidden overnight. And, you see the video and you look at the tree and you're like, okay, well, actually that is big enough to hide there, and, could have happened. When you read her statement to the police, there seems to be a big long gap of time overnight where she's not discussing what happened or all these things. But in the video, the reenactment video, she does take us to a very large tree, which could have been capable of hiding a person overnight. So the question is, why not reveal this information in the immediate aftermath of events? It would have been much, much better for the RCMP and Miss Banfield's public reputations to have done so, rather than letting this linger on for 2 years and letting the doubt, the theories, the questions linger on for this length of time. In my view, she should have spoken out early in some sort of public forum, in a controlled manner, but speak out and let people see her and hear her first-person account. And she could have shown at that time the tree where she hid, so to erase some of these lingering doubts that were festering, and reasonably so, by the way. I'll talk about that in a second. On the other hand, so some of the things did confirm. On the other hand, she also said that she threw a puffy jacket out. That wasn't found in the woods. Would have been quite easy to find. And then there was this rope, or it might have been a waistband for a house coat or something like that, which she said Wortman tied her around her wrist to drag her through the woods to the warehouse building. Also not found. So not everything's been confirmed. So that still may leave some questions for people that are not unreasonable to ask. Would have been reasonable cross-examination questions if Miss Banfield was being cross-examined. So I think it's still natural to retain some doubt about her version of events. Also, the RCMP, bizarrely, didn't take any photographs of her injury. So there was this dispute about whether she was really injured. Mr. Jodry says when she showed up, she looked fine. She didn't look weathered, didn't have black feet, all of these things. She had back injury. She was in the hospital for a few days, these sorts of things, but no photographs of her injuries, scrapes and bruises, those sorts of things, which would, you see that in every police investigation where somebody is alleging an assault. You see that there's photographs taken of the injuries. It is incredible that in the largest mass shooting in Canadian history, there would be no photographs taken of the injuries to the spouse of the perpetrator. So, still fair to retain some doubt. Now, but in fairness to Miss Banfield and everybody else, the presentation, the evidence, they did sort of plug some of the holes that were identified earlier. Now, some will say that this proves that everybody that had a theory, an alternate theory, were out, just out to lunch, or were sort of perpetuating misogynistic attitudes, ideas, and all that stuff. I say no. Not that there was none of that, but that wasn't the primary instinct. It is rather the instinct to secrecy, the instinct to micromanage the narrative of these events, which will remain permanent critiques of the RCMP and the Mass Casualty Commission. They have done this from the beginning. It has been their main downfall. That everything that they've done to try to hide information and repress and control the narrative, had they just let that go, things would have turned out much, much better for the RCMP, for Miss Banfield, for the Mass Casualty Commission. These theories that have emerged about, all right, well, was she gone overnight with him over those 6-7 hours doing something? Was she directing things? All these theories that came out they weren't based on nothing. They relied on statements from Mr. Jodry and others, and police, the gaps in evidence that weren't discussed publicly, that nobody would dispute publicly, and the natural suspicion that one should have when in the face of institutional secrecy over a major public event such as this. So I don't fault anybody for having these alternate theories. Some of those were undercut a little today by Miss Banfield's testimony, and that's fine. That's what testimony, or well, not her testimony, sorry, by the presentation of her statements and her reenactment. Well, that's what testimony and that evidence is supposed to do, is get us a better sense of what really happened. Had this been done much, much earlier, then would have been better for these institutions, better for these individuals. So tomorrow there are continuing roundtable discussions of further expertise. Boy, the experts in this field seem to have very basic expertise, but we'll see what they have to say tomorrow. I think if you gathered the first 5 people off the street that you found and started asking them about these things, they'd come up with much of the same conclusions that these experts do. But we'll hear from more tomorrow, and then Friday we will hear from Miss Banfield in person, talking about who knows what other than the incident itself. So we'll see about all that. Anyway, that's it for me today. Thanks again for watching. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and all those good things, and we'll see you next time.